an immigrant shepherd girl, vanished in the Rocky Mountains on a hearing trip, disappearing with no clues left behind, as if the wilderness had swallowed her. But 22 years later, her father returns to her, the exact same location, and makes a terrifying discovery, one that finally uncovers what happened on that day over 2 decades ago. The first hints of dawn painted the Wyoming sky in muted grays as Miguel Santos moved through the familiar routines at Whitaker Livestock and Wool Farm at 55, his weathered hands worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent over 2 decades tending to sheep, mending fences, and maintaining the sprawling property that had become both his livelihood and his prison of memories. Rock Hollow, Wyoming was the kind of place that existed in the shadow of the Wind River Range, where the economy revolved around wool production and the ancient rhythms of shepherding that had sustained families for generations. Thesmall Highland farming town, nestled against the mountains like a child seeking comfort from a parent. Its modest buildings and gravel roads, testament to a simpler way of life that tourism brochures love to romanticize. But few outsiders truly understood. Miguel was bent over a section of damaged fencing near the main barn, his breath visible in the crisp morning air when his satellite phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet, like a blade causing the nearby sheep to shift nervously in their pen. He recognized Harold Whitaker's number immediately. "Miguel, thank God you picked up." Harold's voice crackled through the phone, carrying an urgency that made Miguel straighten up immediately. "Harold, what's wrong?" "It's barely past 5:30. I need you to take the sheep herd up to Sheephorn Mountain today, right?" "No, actually." Miguel set down his wire cutters and wiped his hands on his worn jeans. "Right now. Harold, I'm in the middle of fixing the north fence. 2 panels came loose in last night's wind, and if I don't get them secured, the fence can wait, Harold." Interrupted Tom, called in sick, and he was supposed to take the herd up this morning. "I can't find anyone else on such short notice, and you know how important it is to get them to the high pasture while the weather holds." Miguel felt his stomach tighten the mountains after all these years. Harold was asking him to return to the place where everything had gone wrong. "Harold, you know I haven't done them mountain runs in years, not since he didn't need to finish the sentence." They both knew what had happened the last time Miguel had tried to shepherd alone in those high meadows. "I know, Miguel, I know it's difficult for you." Harold's voice softened with the kind of understanding that came from years of friendship and shared hardship. "But you're the best shepherd I've got, even if you haven't been up there recently. And honestly, you're the only one I trust with the whole herd." Miguel closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of grief and anxiety settling over him like a heavy blanket. The last time he'd attempted a mountain shepherding run had been nearly 10 years ago, and it had ended in disaster. The hallucinations had started almost immediately, glimpses of his 9-year-old daughter Lucia darting between the sheep, her laughter echoing off the canyon walls. He'd become so disoriented that he'd nearly walked off a cliff, saved only by his border collie's frantic barking. Since then, Harold had kept Miguel working around the farm itself, understanding that his employees' psychological wounds ran deeper than anything time could heal. Miguel had been grateful for the consideration, but it also meant he'd never stopped hoping that someday Lucia might find her way back to Rock Hollow, back to the only home she'd ever known in America. "The other workers don't have your experience with the terrain," Harold continued, "and Tom was supposed to take them up to Sheephorn Meadow, not just the lower pastures. You know how tricky that route can be." Miguel opened his eyes and stared up at the mountains, their peaks already catching the early morning light. Somewhere up there 22 years ago, his daughter had vanished without a trace, despite countless search parties, police investigations, and his own desperate wandering. Through every canyon and meadow, he could find Lucia Santos had simply disappeared, as if the mountains had swallowed her whole. "Miguel, you still there, yeah?" "I'm here." Miguel rubbed his forehead, feeling the familiar tension headache beginning to build. "Harold, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. What if I have another episode? Look, I'll make this easier for you. Take the truck, instead of going on foot drive as far up as you can. Then it's just a short hike to set up camp, and it's only for one night. Just get them settled in the high pasture and bring them back tomorrow." The truck option did make it more manageable in the old days. When Miguel had first started working for Harold, they'd driven the herds up on foot, following ancient paths that had been used by shepherds for generations, but modern ranching had adapted to include vehicles for the initial transport, saving time and energy for the actual grazing management. Miguel thought about the 23 sheep currently pinned and waiting for their journey to the mountain pastures. They needed the rich grass that only grew at higher altitudes, and the timing was crucial too early, and they'd face late spring storms too late, and they'd miss the brief window of optimal grazing before summer drought set in. "This is really a one-time thing?" Miguel asked, knowing even as he spoke that he was going to agree. Harold had given him everything, a work visa when he was a desperate immigrant with a young daughter, steady employment for over 2 decades, sponsorship for his green card, and eventually his path to citizenship. The least he could do was help during an emergency. One time Harold confirmed, "And Miguel, I know this isn't easy for you. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option." Miguel looked at the damaged fence then, at the sheep pen, then back up at the mountains where somewhere among the peaks and meadows, his little girl had become a ghost that haunted every rock and tree. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll do it." "Thank ye. You, Miguel. I owe you for this." After ending the call, Miguel stood for a moment in the growing light, listening to the sheep bleating softly in their pen and the distant sound of wind through the pines. 22 years ago, he'd been a young father with dreams of moving to a big city, of giving Lucia the opportunities that America promised. Instead, they'd stayed in this small mountain town year after year, because how could he leave when she might come home? He walked to the equipment shed and grabbed the truck keys from their hook. The old Ford pickup had seen better days, but it was reliable, enough for mountain work. Loading the portable fencing panels and camping equipment took the better part of an hour, and by the time he was ready to herd the sheep into the truck's specially designed livestock compartment, the sun had fully risen over the eastern peaks as Miguel guided the last sheep up the loading ramp. He found himself thinking about how much had changed since those early days when he and Lucia had first arrived from Peru. Everything in America had seemed impossibly modern and efficient. Even something as ancient as shepherding had been updated with trucks, satellite phones, and GPS devices. Back then, he'd been proud of adapting to these new methods, seeing them as symbols of the progress he was making in his adopted country. Now, as he secured the livestock gate and climbed into the driver's seat, Miguel couldn't help but feel that all the modern conveniences in the world couldn't fill the hole that his daughter's disappearance had left in his life. He'd learned fluent English, earned his citizenship, and built a reputation as one of the most reliable ranch hands in the county. But none of it mattered when he went to bed each night in an empty house, still listening for footsteps that would never come. The drive up into the mountains took just under 3 hours, winding along increasingly narrow roads until he reached the final vehicle access point. Miguel parked the truck in a small clearing that served as an unofficial staging area for shepherds and hikers, then began the process of unloading his sheep and equipment as Miguel started the climb toward Sheephorn Meadow, guiding his small flock along the well-worn path. He noticed dark clouds beginning to gather over the western peaks. The weather in these mountains could change rapidly, and what had started as a clear morning was already showing signs of an approaching rain. He picked up his pace, knowing that he needed to reach some kind of shelter before the weather turned completely. Halfway up the trail, Miguel spotted the stone hut that had served as an emergency shelter for shepherds for generations, built from local granite and designed to withstand the harsh mountain winter. When Miguel finally reached Sheephorn Meadow, the vast alpine pasture land stretched before him like a green carpet rolled across the slopes of Sheephorn Mountain. This place had been the heart of the region's shepherding tradition. For generations, the meadow sat at an elevation where the air was thin and clean, surrounded by peaks that caught the clouds and released them as life-giving snow and rain. But as Miguel crested the final rise with his small flock, he realized he wasn't alone. Spread across the far side of the meadow was another sheep herd vastly larger than his own modest group of 23 animals. Even from a distance, he could count what looked like hundreds of sheep, their white forms dotting the landscape like scattered clouds around. There moved at least a dozen workers, far more than any normal shepherding operation would require the site. made Miguel pause in all his years of bringing sheep to these high pastures. He'd rarely encountered such a large operation. Most of the local farms like Harold's Ransmuller herds that could be managed by one or two experienced shepherds. This looked more like an industrial ceilidh operation, the kind of thing he'd heard about but never seen firsthand as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Miguel guided his sheep toward the historic stone hut that had provided shelter for shepherds since. Before he'd first arrived in America, the structure was a testament to old-world craftsmanship, built from massive blocks of local granite that had been fitted together without mortar, designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters and sudden summer storms that characterized this elevation. Miguel approached the heavy wooden door and knocked, following the unwritten protocol of mountain shepherding. The door swung open to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with pale blue eyes and graying hair beneath a worn cowboy hat. The man's expression immediately soured when he saw Miguel, his gaze taking in everything from Miguel's weathered clothes to his obviously non-Anglo features. "What do you want?" the man demanded, his voice carrying the flat accent of someone who'd lived his entire life in these mountains. "I was hoping to shelter here for the night," Miguel replied politely in his still accented but fluent English. "The weather's turning, and I have sheep to protect." The American shepherd's face hardened further. "Well, you can forget about that idea right now. I got here first with my herd, and this is my hut. Anyway, you need to take your animals somewhere else." Miguel knew that competition between shepherds could lead to territorial disputes, but the man's hostility seemed excessive even by those standards. "I understand you were here first," Miguel said carefully, "but there's plenty of room in the meadow for both our herds, and the hut is large enough." "Listen here," the man interrupted, stepping closer and studying Miguel with unconcealed disdain. "This stone hut was built by my grandfather out of local granite. It belongs to my family, not to some immigrant shepherd who probably just works for some tiny operation." His eyes narrowed as he continued, "You look like you're no size to match a real ranching outfit like mine. Better move along before you cause any trouble." The racist undertones in the man's words hit Miguel like a physical blow. In his 22 years in America, he'd encountered prejudice before, but rarely so blatantly. The man was clearly making assumptions based solely on Miguel's appearance and accent, dismissing him as somehow lesser without knowing anything about his experience or qualifications. "I don't want any trouble," Miguel said, fighting to keep his voice level. "I just need shelter for my sheep." The American shepherd sneered, "Then you should have thought of that before bringing your diseased animals up here. Find somewhere else with that." He slammed the door, leaving Miguel standing in the increasing rain for a moment. Miguel just stood there, processing the encounter, shaking off his anger. Miguel led his sheep to a relatively flat area, about 100 yards from the stone hut, and began setting up his emergency tent. The portable shelter wasn't as comfortable as the hut would have been, but it was waterproof and large enough to provide adequate protection, as he worked to establish a temporary fence around his grazing area. Miguel found himself studying the massive operation spread across the rest of the meadow. What he saw troubled him. The other herd was indeed enormous. He estimated at least 300 or 400 sheep, requiring constant management by the dozen or so workers he could see moving among them. But it was the workers themselves that caught his attention from their movements, and the brief conversations he could overhear carried on the mountain wind. It was clear that most, if not all of them, were immigrants like himself. He could hear snippets of Spanish, what sounded like Portuguese, and other languages he couldn't immediately identify. Miguel waved and smiled at one of the workers, a woman who was tending sheep near the boundary between the two herds. She was closer than the others, close enough that he could see she was relatively young, probably in her 30s, with the kind of weather-beaten complexion that came from years of outdoor work. Before the woman could respond to his greeting, the door of the stone hut burst open again, and the American shepherd emerged this time. His voice carried clearly across the meadow as he shouted orders at his workers. "Get those animals away from his herd," the man bellowed, pointing directly at Miguel. "I don't want his diseased sheep mixing with ours, and I don't want any of you talking to him either." Miguel felt his face burn with humiliation as he realized the man was referring to him and his animals with racial slurs, loud enough for everyone in the meadow to hear. The accusations about disease were particularly glowing. Miguel's sheep were healthy and well cared for, and any experienced shepherd would be able to see that immediately he watched as the workers began efficiently moving, fencing and guiding their portion of the massive herd away from his smaller group. Their movements were quick and practiced, suggesting they were used to following orders without question. The woman who had been nearest to Miguel's area gathered her sheep and started to move them, but not before catching his eye again, the American shepherd Miguel had heard. One of the workers, called him Mr. Cyrus, disappeared back into the stone hut, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed across the meadow like a gunshot, causing some of the sheep to look up nervously from their grazing. A few minutes later, Miguel noticed the same woman worker waving at him, this time in a way that was clearly meant to get his attention. She was standing near another woman slightly older, and both of them were glancing toward the stone hut as if making sure they weren't being observed. Curious and still stinging from his encounter with their boss, Miguel secured his sheep behind their temporary fence and walked over toward the two women. Ash got closer. He could see that the younger woman was indeed in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that had seen hard use. The older woman appeared to be in her late 30s, with a more weathered face and the careful posture of someone who'd learned to be constantly alert. "Hello," Miguel said in Spanish. Hoping they might be more comfortable in that language, the younger woman smiled and responded in heavily accented English. "Hello, I am Anna. This is Tira." She gestured to her companion, who nodded politely. "I'm Miguel." He replied also in English, "I am sorry about what happened earlier with your boss." Anna's expression became apologetics. "Yes, sorry about that. He can be difficult, but he is just trying to manage very large herd. You understand, sometimes he gets stressed." Miguel nodded, though privately, he thought stress was no excuse for racism. "I understand. I can see you have a lot of sheep to manage. I didn't mean to cause any problems. I just needed shelter from the storm, of course." Tira said, her English equally broken but understandable. "We don't mind sharing. Meadow is plenty of space for everyone." "Thank you," Miguel said, gratefully. "Where do you both come from?" "I'm from Rock Hollow, not too far from here, on the other side of the mountain. Usually one of our other workers does these mountain trips, but he was sick today, so I had to fill in. It's been a long time since I've been up here. I'm not sure what's changed." The two women exchanged a quick glance. Before Anna answered, "We come from Silver Ridge, his town on other side of mountain." Miguel nodded. "Ah, yes, I know Silver Ridge. I've been there a few times. Over the years, it's a bit larger than Rock Hollow. We're just a small farming community." He paused, noticing their hesitation. "What farm do you work for?" "I don't think I know your boss." Again, the women hesitated, and Miguel noticed they didn't answer his question directly. "Silver Ridge has many farms," Anna said vaguely, sensing their discomfort. Miguel decided not to press well. "I should get back to my sheep," he said. But then something made him pause. "Are you both okay? You're not being exploited or anything?" "If you need help," Anna and Tira both shook their heads quickly. "Life can be hard," Anna said in her careful English, "but this is better than life for many people." The words hit Miguel like a thunderbolt. It was almost exactly what he used to tell Lucia whenever she complained about their circumstances in those early years back in Peru. They had dreamed of moving to a big American city, of the opportunities and prosperity that awaited them, when reality turned out to be a small mountain town and hard ranch work. Lucia had sometimes expressed disappointment. "We should be grateful," Miguel had told her over and over. "This is better than what many people have. We have steady work, a safe place to live, and opportunities to build a better future." Now, hearing those same sentiments from Anna, Miguel felt momentarily stunned. Anna noticed Heist's expression and waved her hand gently near his face, smiling with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. As Anna's hand moved, Miguel noticed her slender fingers and eye. When she smiled, something about her expression reminded him powerfully of Lucia. For just a moment he found himself staring, seeing his daughter's face in this young woman's features, but he quickly dismissed the thought as wishful thinking and the product of being back in this place where his memories were strongest. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just tired from the journey up here." Before either woman could respond, the door of the stone hut banged open again. and Cyrus emerged, his face dark with anger. He strode quickly toward them, his boots squelching in the increasingly muddy ground. "What did I tell you about talking to him?" Cyrus demanded, shoving Miguel's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble backward. "Get back to your own herd and stay there." He then turned on Anna and Tira, his voice harsh. "And you two know better than to disobey my direct orders. Get back to work and don't let me catch you socializing again." Miguel steadied himself and faced Cyrus. "Look, I don't know what your problem is with me. I haven't been up here in years and I had no idea you'd be using this area. There's no reason we can't share the meadow peacefully." Cyrus stepped closer, his face inches from Miguel's. "My problem is immigrant workers who don't know their place and think they can." A loud rumble of thunder interrupted his words, echoing off the surrounding peaks. All of them looked up to see that the storm clouds had grown much darker and more threatening. While they'd been talking, Cyrus stepped back, his anger apparently overridden by practical concerns. "Pack it up," he shouted to his workers. "We're heading back down the mountain before this gets worse." Miguel watched as Anna and Thierry immediately responded with, "Yes, Mr. Cyrus," and hurried back toward their section of the herd. Within minutes, the large operation was in motion, workers efficiently collapsing fences and gathering equipment with the practiced speed of people who'd done this many times before. The rain intensified as Cyrus and his workers disappeared down the mountain trail, their large flock of sheep moving like a living cloud through the misty rain. Miguel stood watching until they were completely out of sight, then turned, his attention back to his own sheep. The animals huddled together against the worsening weather, seeking whatever protection they could find. Miguel checked the fence one final time, ensuring it was secure enough to withstand the storm, satisfied that his sheep were as protected as possible. He made a decision despite Cyrus's territorial claims. The stone hut was the only proper shelter on this part of the mountain. It had been used by shepherds for generations. It didn't belong to any single person. "Public refuge," Miguel muttered to himself as he approached the hut, rainwater dripping from his hat and jacket. He pushed the wooden door open and stepped inside. The interior was exactly as he remembered it from years ago, a simple one-room structure with a small stone fireplace, a wooden table, with 2 chairs and a narrow bed frame against the back wall. Some previous occupant had left firewood stacked neatly beside the hearth. Miguel shrugged off his wet jacket and hung it on a peg near the door. He started a small fire in the fireplace, grateful for its immediate warmth as he laid out his supplies on the table. The familiar smell of woodsome smoke filled the space, triggering memories of the many nights he'd spent here over the years. As he arranged his food and water on the table, a small detail caught his eye. There, carved into the wooden surface, was a distinct flower pattern with the initials LS beneath it. Miguel froze, his hand hovering over the carving. "No," he whispered, heart racing. "It can't be." He traced the flower with his fingertips, recognizing the distinctive 6-petal design that Lutia had carved into countless objects as a kilt. She developed the habit shortly after they arrived in Wyoming, marking tree trunks, fence posts, and furniture with her initials and that same flower pattern. "She was here," Miguel said aloud, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He began searching the hut frantically, looking for any other signs of his daughter. Near the bed, partially hidden in the shadowy corner, he spotted something else. Miguel knelt down and picked up a dusty, broken dream catcher. The once colorful threads were faded, and several of the small beads were missing. But Miguel recognized it immediately. Lucia had been fascinated by dream catchers. She'd made several of them after learning about them from a Native American woman who occasionally sold crafts in Rock Hollow. This one had the same pattern of weaving that Lucia had preferred, with the distinctive blue android threads she always chose. Miguel's hands trembled as he held the dream catcher. 2 pieces of evidence, both unmistakably connected to Lucia in a place he hadn't visited in years. How long had they been here? Why hadn't he noticed the carving during his previous visits? With sudden urgency, Miguel pulled his satellite phone from his pack. These phones were expensive but necessary for shepherds working in remote areas without cellular coverage. He dialed Harold's number, pacing anxiously as he waited for his boss to answer. "Miguel, Everything. Okay up there, Harold's voice crackled through the connection. Harold, I need to leave. Someone has to come take care of the sheep, Miguel said without preamble. What, Miguel, what are you talking about? It found something evidence that Lucia was here in the stone hut on Sheephorn. Meadow, there was a pause on the line, Miguel. Are you sure it's been 22 years? I'm sure, Harold. I know my daughter's markings. She carved her initials here and I found her dream catcher. Someone else must come for the sheep I have to go. That's not possible. Miguel, we don't have anyone else available right now. You can't just abandon, then come yourself. Miguel interrupted, his voice rising. I've worked for you for 22 years without complaint. I'm asking for this one thing. Miguel, be reasonable. The sheep are. Secure in the fence. I'm at Sheephorn Meadow by the old stone hut. Someone needs to be here by morning. Miguel's tone left no room for negotiation. I'll explain everything. Later, before Harold could respond further, Miguel ended the call. He knew his boss would be angry. But that didn't matter now. Nothing mattered except following this lead while it was fresh. Miguel gathered only his most essential belongings and the dream catcher, leaving the rest of his supplies in the hut. He took one last look at the carved flower and initials, committing them to memory, then stepped back out into the storm. The rain had transformed the mountain path into a slippery, treacherous descent. Miguel moved as quickly as safety allowed, his mind racing faster than his feet. By the time he reached his truck, his clothes were soaked through and his boots were caked with mud, but he barely noticed his physical discomfort. He started the engine and turned the truck towards Silver Ridge, the town on the opposite side of the mountain where Anna and Tirahad said they were from, the same town where Cyrus must be based, if the stone hut belonged to him. He claimed then he might know something about the carving, about Lutia, as Miguel navigated the winding mountain roads in the pouring rain. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope 20 minutes after leaving the mountain, Miguel found himself navigating unfamiliar roads towards Silver Ridge. The rain had eased slightly, but visibility remained poor. His headlights scarved a narrow path through the fog, illuminating the winding road just feet ahead of his truck. His mind was so consumed with thoughts of the carving and dream catcher that he almost missed the figures at the roadside. A quick flash of color caught his peripheral vision. An elderly woman with a young girl beside her, thumb extended in the universal sign for a ride. Miguel's first instinct was to drive past. He was on an urgent mission, and any delay could mean losing track of Cyrus before getting answers. But as his headlights fully illuminated the pair, an elderly woman with silver hair and a girl no older than 10, both soaked from the rain, his conscience wouldn't allow him to leave them stranded. He pulled over, rolling down his window as rain immediately splattered the interior. "Where are you headed?" he called out. The woman stepped closer, sheltering the child under a flimsy umbrella that had clearly lost its battle with the wind. Silver Ridge. "We're just trying to get home." "I'm going there too," Miguel said. "Do you need a ride?" "Oh, would you? That would be such a blessing," the woman said, relief evident in her voice. "We live on Pinnerest Avenue." "Come in," Miguel said. Unlocking the doors, the woman helped the girl into the back seat before climbing in herself. Both were thoroughly drenched. "I'm sorry I don't have any blankets," Miguel said, adjusting the heater to its highest setting. "I'm just a shepherd heading into town. No need to apologize," the woman said, helping the girl remove her wet jacket. "We're grateful for the ride." "I'm Edith Holloway, and this is my granddaughter, Mara Miguel Santos," he replied, putting the truck back in motion. "What were you doing out in this weather?" "We were picking fruit at the Johnsons' orchard," Edith explained, rubbing Mara's hands between hers to warm them. "We didn't expect the rain to come, so suddenly Mara sneezed, prompting Edith to wrap an arm around her shoulders. "I hope you don't catch cold, sweetie. We have so much to do tomorrow." "I don't want to be sick for my birthday," the girl said, sniffling. "Tomorrow's your birthday?" Miguel asked, making eye contact with Mara in the rear-view mirror. She nodded. "I'm going to be 11. Grandma and I are baking shepherd's pies to give to all our neighbors. We'll bake tonight if you're feeling up to it," Edith said, smoothing the girl's damp hair. Miguel smiled at their exchange. "Happy early birthday, Mara." "Thank you," the girl beamed. "Would you like to come over tomorrow for lunch or dinner? We always make extra shepherd's pie." "That's very kind." Of you, Miguel said, touched by the invitation from complete strangers. But I'm not from Silver Ridge, I'm just visiting a friend. Oh, who's your friend? Edith asked. It's a small town. Everyone knows everyone unless they're new. Of course, Miguel hesitated, then decided there was no harm in mentioning Cyrus's name. He's American, actually. His name is